the opportunities were scarce for the two starting wide receivers, or two of the three starting wide receivers. If you look at, of course, Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson, but they came up big in various spots, laid down the stretch against Ohio State and against TCU. Take out Ronnie Bell, who, of course, from an offensive standpoint, he almost exemplified the resurgence of Michigan football, kind of going through that down period in the 2020 season and really showing his leadership skills in addition to what he brings and brought for Michigan football on the field. So Ronnie Bell moves on, but Johnson and Wilson back. And so is it their deal, or do guys like Darius Clemens, even like the recruit that they brought in, English, those guys and others on the roster, will they need other guys to step up?
I definitely think they're going to need more than those two to step up, but those are the two guys that need to step up the most. Not saying they can't do it. They've done it. We've seen it in 2021 when Ronnie Bell went down in week 1 with an ACL tear. It was Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson who stepped up. Now, Wilson has had the bad luck of being injured on the road in week 5, 2 straight years. That's not been great. What you could see in the TCU game when Michigan was trying to stage a comeback, you could see kind of what he was capable of, making just incredibly dynamic, electric plays. He's one of the fastest wide receivers in the conference, but don't really get to see it that often. Cornelius has that capability of being that big possession receiver, but he's been kind of streaky, right? Like I feel like, and I've said this on the Locked On Wolverines podcast several times, it's like every time that I make like a verbal mention on the sidelines of Cornelius Johnson having kind of a disappointing game or disappointing stretch, it's almost like he hears me and suddenly starts making big catches. He did it at Indiana, literally like 2 plays before he got his first of 2 touchdowns in that game. I said something about it, him not, maybe not being the guy that you want to throw to. And then he is the one who got Michigan kind of going in that game. And I said the same thing again, probably about 2-3 plays before he made his first touchdown against Ohio State. So consistency is probably the biggest thing for him. Healthiness is probably the biggest thing for Roman Wilson because he's just been so limited through a lot of the year. So bubble wrap that guy in week 5. Don't let him go to Nebraska. Maybe just keep him at home. Put him in one of those bubble boy type situations. Let him watch it on the couch. Just keep him safe for the rest of the season. I am curious to see who the other guys are. Tyler Morris looks like he could very well take up Ronnie Bell's spot. He's going to be wearing Ronnie Bell's number 8 this season. He's going into his second year. He was a teammate with J.J. McCarthy at the high school level before McCarthy transferred to IMG Academy. So they certainly have a rapport there. And you mentioned Darius Clemens. I think that he could be that next really great receiver for Michigan, but we didn't really see it much of it in year 1. That's not abnormal. Doesn't you don't always look at first-year receivers and expect them to be breakouts. It's more year 2 and beyond. But that said, I mean, they really like some of the freshmen they have. You mentioned English. He just got on campus for summer conditioning, but they really like what they've got in Frederick Moore and Samaj Morgan. Morgan being kind of that smaller, shiftier type, Ronnie Bell type, essentially, more of an inside slot type receiver. He's a local guy from West Bloomfield, but Frederick Moore out of Missouri, he was a 3-star. They really like him. He's a little bit taller. He's not huge by any means, but he had a couple of really big catches in the spring game, and I think that might be indicative of what he's capable of and their faith in what he's able to do. One he had like a 40-ish yard catch. It wasn't a catch and run. He went downfield and went up and got it, and that's the type of thing that Michigan really needs, is that downfield passing attack, right, to get those receivers to be able to make those types of plays. So that would be, most of them. But let's not forget Peyton O'Leary. And I almost did, actually, because Peyton O'Leary was the guy who set the spring game on fire. He's a former walk-on. He got talked about last year in fall camp as being a Cooper Kupp-esque, and then just didn't really show up in games. And, everyone kind of wondered, was Jim Harbaugh just bloviating just about, trying to get everyone involved in his little depth chart performance. But then we finally got to see it in the spring game. I mean, he absolutely put the corners on skates. After all of this talk of Amarian Walker being a unicorn at cornerback after moving him from wide receiver, he just had him looking awful the entire time, and anyone they put on him just didn't really seem to matter. So I think that he's going to play a big role. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being that number 3 guy, because he has kind of everything that you want. Under recruited type of player, played lacrosse, I believe, initially, and he's thought of inside of Schembechler Hall as being one of the better receivers. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes out and makes a big difference.
We got Colston Loveland, who stepped up down the stretch. Didn't take long for all of us to feel like, wow, this guy is a find. Where was he? And I'm talking about folks outside of Michigan circles that just saw him show up on the field and start making plays downfield. He had 16 catches and 3 touchdowns. And of course, Michigan likes to have 2 guys that they feel comfortable with as first-rate pass catchers and blockers. And A.J. Barner would be the guy coming in from Indiana with 29 receptions.
Loveland wasn't necessarily little known. If you pay really, really close attention to recruiting, it's kind of rare that a 4-star guy goes under the radar the way that he did. But probably in big part, it's because he was a 4-star coming out of Idaho. It's not exactly a hotbed of talent. But he had offers from Alabama and LSU, and he chose Michigan, and it clearly in year 1 he got his feet wet. Now it's time for him to take that next big step forward, kind of being the guy. Played receiver in high school, and you could really see that, especially with that touchdown against Purdue where he split the defenders and went up and just got it. I was in the end zone, did not even realize he got it. I was like, and only reason I knew he caught the ball was because I heard everyone cheering. So it was a heck of a play by him, especially watching the replay. So I think that the next step for him is to learn how to block a little bit more. Supposedly that's one of the major things he's worked on. So I'm curious to see how that works out. A.J. Barner, that's a heck of a transfer for Michigan to get. He's a guy that Tom Allen had told him that he had the capability, the talent to be the best tight end that Indiana had ever had. Was a team captain for the Hoosiers. Just didn't really work out that way. They just didn't really try to get him the ball, right? Like he says he could set all of the records in Bloomington, and they just didn't really get him the ball. But he's got the leadership. He's certainly got the ability. He's not necessarily quite as muscular as like a Luke Schoonmaker who's just departing, but kind of a hybrid between Luke Schoonmaker and Eric All. And whereas Colston Loveland somewhere between Eric All and, just pick a receiver, I guess. So I think that it will be interesting to see how the blocking aspect works, because I wouldn't look at either of them as necessarily being just at this juncture, until we see it more in games, that either of them are really going to have the type of ability that Luke or Eric had. But I mean, they have other guys that can, right? Max Bredesen, former walk-on, he was brother Ben Bredesen, the starting left guard and team captain. He's been a really positive blocker for Michigan, especially in the pass blocking. I think if I'm remembering correctly, he was the top tight end in pass blocking when he was in there, according to PFF. And then Matthew Hibner has just kind of waited his turn, another 4-star out of Burke, Virginia. He's just been kind of biding his time. Had the big special teams play against Maryland to open the game. But it hasn't been able to really see the field because there's all this talent that Michigan's had. And that's not even mentioning the other freshmen, because Michigan's never really seemed to be afraid to get freshmen involved. I didn't even mention Marlon Klein, who's going into I can't even remember if Marlon Klein's a sophomore or freshman, because we just don't see some of these guys at this point, right? But Deacon Tonielli is coming in. I think Marlon Klein's the other one. They've got a lot of talent. Some of it's very untapped, but certainly a lot of bodies. Definitely really good pass catchers. I'll just be curious to see how the blocking aspect goes, because Eric All was not afraid to throw himself into the fray. Luke Schoonmaker went from being a guy who was thought as primarily a blocker to being a guy who became a big-time pass-catching threat for Michigan. So I that's the one place that I think on the entire offense I'm looking at it and saying, all right, that could be something to look at. I don't know that it will be, but it could be.
Yeah, I'm not going to question the 1-2. Colston Loveland is a big angular guy. And when I say big, I mean tall. So he's not necessarily built like some mauling tight end.
And he's like a male model. And I say that because he literally, granted, this NIL thing, I was shooting photography, and he felt very uncomfortable. But my girlfriend who was shooting with me, she was like, she was calling him, I think, to his face, an Abercrombie model, because that's what he looks like. He's got that lean, angular, like you said. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much he's willing to put his body in there.